You have to understand that there is an important difference with the Bayside and St. Anne's site, and that is that at the moment we are using those sites to decant Bishop Fitzgerald Old School and Governor's Meadow from the sites that they used to have at Europort. So the developer who wants to buy Bayside and St. Anne's plots needs to wait for us to have developed the schools at Europort Avenue, because we cannot give them what is called vacant possession, handing over of the land for them to do their project, until we've moved the schools out. And so in this case, it makes sense to try and do a deal where the person who is going to be the developer of the land also becomes the developer of the schools, because then there is a common interest there. And the common interest is that they want to see the schools developed in the 20-month period that we're talking about. It's as much in their interest to get the land as it is in our interest to get the new schools for our children in that time frame. And so that's why we're doing it in this way in relation to this plot of land.
Will you be considering this formula for other sites?
So I don't think there's any other site where we are presently in occupation and our ability to hand over vacant possession is dependent on a relocation of this sort. Remember that Gibraltar, whenever you're doing an allocation of land, you tend to have to do a relocation of one or two others, but the government arbitrarily does that itself in order to be able to then hand over the land to a developer or to a purchaser. That is not what we're envisaging doing in respect of any other plot of land.
At a time when Gibraltar has had to borrow, such a deep-pocketed investor must seem like a dream come true. What would you say to concerns that you might be putting a lot of eggs in one basket?
Well, look, you have to understand the financial environment in which the world is at the moment. There are very few people who are cash rich. There are some people who are cash rich, and those people are able to work now in an environment where they can deliver projects that others cannot deliver. The government of Gibraltar is in a deficit situation for very good reason, because we have invested money to ensure that people had enough at the end of each week and each month during the pandemic when they weren't working to be able to continue to survive through this period. And so we cannot invest cash, which we don't have, in a project like the schools. Here, in the context of the TNG Global Foundation, you have an entity that is cash rich and is able to put up front the money that it would usually pay for the handover of the land once it was vacant, before the land is vacant, because the covenant on the other side is the government of Gibraltar. They trust the government of Gibraltar that obviously will deliver the land at the end of the process. And therefore that means that we can work with this developer in relation to this and potentially indeed other projects, because they have the ability to complete. And that would be not just in relation to the world in which we live at the moment. There's a recession around the world, recessionary pressures, inflationary pressures, but also in the context of perhaps some projects which in the past have depended on third-party financing, which has not been produced, and therefore the projects have not been able to go forward.
But no concern that you'll end up with a lot of sites belonging to the same person?
Well, Gibraltar is a small place. We need to ensure that we diversify what we're doing, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't expect to see one developer doing more than one thing at any one time. Let me give you an example. You've got the Montague Group that in the past have been responsible for Gibraltar's home ownership boom in partnership with the government since the 1980s. They've done a lot of projects, some of them at the same time, under the first GSLP administration, the first GSD administration, under the AACR administration in the mid-80s, and obviously under my administration as well. And you've got other groups, for example, the group headed by Mr. Butcher, who have done developments and sometimes have had 2 or 3 developments on at one particular time. At the moment, if you looked at the Butcher entities, they're doing the works down at the Marina Village, they're doing the reserve at the same time. So you've always got groups that are doing more than one thing at any particular time. That is a good thing as long as you haven't just got one group doing more than one thing at any particular time. And Gibraltar is diversifying those developers that are working in Gibraltar. We've got the Victoria Keys Consortium. Victoria Keys has already started to be reclaimed, as you know, and that involves also the Montague Group, it involves other entities, it involves the government as well. So you've got a diversification of groups doing economic activity in Gibraltar at a time when there is less economic activity than you might expect, because the government itself is not cash rich enough to be the driver of growth, as it has been in particular since 2007.
We're, of course, talking about an investor who donated over £3.5 million for a park. The opposition is today questioning whether there's any link with this and whether these discussions were ongoing at the time of the donation.
Well, I can tell you there's absolutely no link. In fact, if there was a link, it would be a link which, frankly, would be the opposite of the innuendo that the opposition is trying to suggest. Let me tell you why that is the case. The investment in Bayside is one which has been negotiated in the period after the summer. Right? We have been working very hard since September to try and bring to a head this negotiation and to be able to deliver this result. And I hope that we'll be able to make other announcements shortly in respect of what we're doing with this group. Second, you look at what it is that the donation is in respect of the park. It's being done by an entity in this group, but not by the same entity. And that donation is a donation which was announced by the government. This was not something that was kept secret. It wasn't a donation to a political party or a donation to a politician. It was a donation to the taxpayer. In other words, a donation to the community, to Gibraltar as a whole.
Which came in very handy to the government.
Well, to the government and every single taxpayer in Gibraltar.
But to the government who'd been criticised for spending so much on a park.
I don't think that the government really is going to concern itself about opposition criticism in respect of a park, because if you look at the criticism that they levelled against us in respect of Commonwealth Park, which is something that now everybody loves and takes for granted, we consider that the opposition will criticise us for doing a park, for not doing a park, because of what a park costs or because of what a park doesn't cost. So you mustn't think for one moment that this was a motivation at all for us to go and seek a donation. And I must tell you, this was not a donation that we sought. This was a donation that was volunteered, because the ultimate beneficial owner behind these entities is making Gibraltar an important part of his life and wants to contribute to Gibraltar. So just to finish the explanation I was giving you, this is a donation to the taxpayer, to the community as a whole. And if then the amounts paid for the Bayside plot were less than any other bidder, then you might say this is disgraceful. This man has given a donation of 4 million or 3.75 million pounds, and now he's got this plot for less. In fact, he has given the donation to the community as a whole, and the Bayside plot is being sold to him for much more than the person who offered the next amount. And I wanted to make that explicit in our press release yesterday. So this is the opposition asking us a question, the answer to which was already provided in the government press release. I can tell you that there is a huge gulf of difference between the next highest bidder and the 21.2 million. So the amount being paid over the next bidder is really far in excess of the 4 million, and the 4 million is on top of that amount. So the donation is not something that should lead people to wonder why this has somehow lubricated the grant of the Bayside plot, because the Bayside plot has been sold for more than it would have been sold if it had gone to the next highest bidder. And so therefore we have to put these things in context, and I do understand that the world is now a very cynical place where people constantly believe that things are being done unfairly for corrupt purposes, with somebody lining their pockets and somebody, in particular politicians and in government, always getting a backhander, right? None of that is happening here. This is quite the opposite. People need to look very carefully at what the government has announced, what has been done by Trusted Nova's Bank in the context of the donation of the almost £4 million for the park, what has been paid for the Bayside plot, which is more, not less than the next bidder, and really for one moment suspend the social media cynicism and understand that this is actually a very positive thing in a very difficult financial environment, which will deliver an excellent result for our children in the new schools and for the neighborhood of the development, because instead of simply going for a development which is going to maximize profit for the developer, what you're going to see when the developer starts the process of consultation is that their desire is to bring a development to the area which will be a very good neighbor to those that are already there, both in the offices and facilities that there are in the World Trade Center and Ocean Village, and in our estate, which is Glass's estate next door, and a neighbor also to the GFA and the stadium and sporting facilities there, which will be very complementary, will include leisure areas, will include residential areas, and will include office areas. So I think this is actually a win-win, and I would ask people to judge us by the results and not by the cynicism that seems to infect everything that people now see and look at in respect of government in Gibraltar and governments around the world. Those of us who have been in politics for as long as I have and Sir Joe Bossano have been, we're not in politics to line our pockets. We're in politics to do the best for our community. That is what motivates us. That's what motivates me to get out of bed in the morning and to drive a hard bargain for you and for me together, the community, the taxpayer.